Good evening, everyone. Late Night Mega here, and tonight we're playing Jeskai Nahiri. It's an actual streamlined deck for once. Of course, I've got my own twist to it, but we'll get to those in a moment. So, what brought me to finally playing Jeskai Nahiri was that there were a lot of creature-based decks going around at my local meta, and so I wanted to include both Wall of Omens and Anger of the Gods in the same deck. You know, Anger of the Gods, it's awesome. It exiles, it kills a bunch of small stuff, and it doesn't kill our own Wall of Omens. So I like the interaction with that, and those two both interact nicely with Nahiri, wiping out your opponent's creatures so that they can't attack the Nahiri, and Wall of Omens blocks for Nahiri. So it seemed like a natural fit to just go with that. And I had some slots in the deck, and I wanted to revisit the whole Soulfire Grandmaster and Ojutai's command thing, because I really liked that interaction from my Soulfire deck. And so I'm like, well, hey, I can slip in Soulfire Grandmasters, I can slip in a couple Ojutai's command, and we're good to go. So yeah, and it gives this deck a couple different modes of attack. With the Soulfires, you can start buying back your Lightning Bolts, your Paths, your Helixes, and that just gets really silly. Or you just, do the whole Nahiri thing and get Emrakul and smash them. Either one works, really. Ojutai's command also has some synergy with the Wall of Omens and the Snapcaster Mage, so those are additional options there. Other than that, pretty standard Jeskai stuff. You've got the Lightning Bolts, the Paths, the Serum Visions. Again, I kind of took the same ratio as the Soulfire Grandmaster deck, so it's kind of like a mishmash between that deck and Jeskai Nahiri. We've got the one of Electrolyze in there. And Anger of the Gods, it's also really funny, especially against aggro decks or burn, if you have Soulfire Grandmaster out and then you play Anger of the Gods, which has lifelink. Yeah, you lose your Soulfire Grandmaster, but every time I've done that combo, I've gained at least 12 to 18 life, along with wiping the board. It's ridiculous, and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, this deck interacts very well with creature-based decks. You do have Izzet Charm, again, playing the same type of triple duty that we're used to on this channel. So you can also discard, it's another discard outlet for Emrakul, so if you have an Emrakul or something else in your hand you don't need, just pitch it and whatever else to the Izzet Charm. Yeah, so that's kind of the deck. The mana base, fairly standard. I don't own any Zendikar fetches yet, so that's why there's a Bloodstained Mire in here. But we do have the 4 Flooded Strands. We have 5 of the Shock lands. I went with 2 Hallowed Fountain, 1 Sacred Foundry, and 2 Steam Vents. I've got some check lands in here. I have one of the Spire Bluff Canals. I own one, so I decided to throw it in here, because why not? For man lands, I've got 2 Celestial Colonnade and 2 Wandering Fumaroles, so those are in there. I mean, they're okay, but there have been times where, I'm kind of forced into playing a man land to make my land drops, but I want to be playing some of these cheap things as well. And so there have been some conflicts, but it's also kind of nice to have something to do with all of the mana once we get to 5, 6, 7 lands. Although a lot of times what happens is I end up discarding extra lands to Nahiri to try and get something useful. So there's a lot of games where I was sitting at, just 5 or 6 lands and not really going further with that. In the sideboard, Young Pyromancers, they have synergy with our Ojutai's command, and this is kind of meant to come in places where Wall of Omens is bad. So like combo decks, Tron decks, you try to throw a bunch of damage at them. That's kind of where Young Pyromancer comes in. And same is kind of true here with the Gideon as well. Any place Wall of Omens would be bad, bring in the Gideon, and he can present quite a threat very quickly. Engineered explosives, pithing needles, those are standard by this point. A couple dispels. Again, lots of stuff is close to the ground, especially if I'm sighting in Young Pyromancer, so having cheap instant counter spell, counter whatever's trying to kill the Pyromancer, and get a token off of it. A couple Wear and Tear, and then Stony Silence and Crumble to Dust. I went with a 2-2 split here. It was so difficult for me to make a sideboard for this. I originally had this thing at like 20-some cards. As you'll notice, Blessed Alliance is not in here, so we do not have a sacrifice effect. So do be mindful of that, or you can make adjustments as you see fit. And I wanted to have 3 Crumble to Dust because you guys know how much I hate Tron. But I ended up also wanting 2 Stony Silence, and I feel like a 2-2 split on these is okay. It'll get the job done against Tron. The Stony Silence, I find those to be useful when you have decks that can put some amount of pressure on Tron, and when you have like Young Pyromancer, you have Soulfire Grandmaster, a Stony Silence can slow them down enough to the point where it lets you kind of take the game away, or slow them down enough until you get the Crumble to Dust going. So there's that. However, this deck tech is not going to be done just yet. Since I had the whole Soulfire Grandmaster giving all my instants and sorceries lifelink here, and I had the Ojutize command, there's something else that I wanted to play around with in Modern. And what I ended up doing is, while slotting it into this deck because it was quite easy to make that adjustment, what I ended up doing was taking out the Wall of Omens, the Anger of the Gods, and the Electrolyze. And so let's take a look at what happens after we do that. So what we replace those cards with is 4 Lone Riders, and then we added in the 4th Lightning Helix, a 3rd Ojutize command, and an Ajani Vengeant. So Lone Rider is a card that I've kind of had my eye on as far as trying to use it in Modern, and it just seemed to fit so well in this deck. So it's 2 mana for a 1/1 first strike and lifelink. Doesn't sound impressive at all. Dies to basically anything. But at the beginning of your end step, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, transform Lone Rider, and it becomes a 4/4 with first strike, trample, and lifelink. And so, I looked at that and I saw Lightning Helix and I saw Ojutize command, and I'm like, I want to make a deck around this at some point. And once we have Soulfire Grandmaster, Soulfire plus Lightning Bolt, well, that gives us 3 life as well and meets that requirement. And also, Ajani Vengeant here, his -2 effect, can also flip the Lone Rider. And so a really interesting thing you can do with Ojutize command is you want to do this at the end of your opponent's main phase, is to cast Ojutize command, return your Lone Rider from your graveyard back to play, and gain 4 life. You want to do that before the end step, because at the beginning of the end step, if you gain 3 or more life, that's when it's going to check. So if you wait until the end step, I don't believe that this effect will activate. So you want to do it before the end step, as far as reviving him with Ojutize command. But yeah, an Ojutize command gives you an instant 4/4 first strike trample lifelink. And so this deck became really super good against any sort of burn deck or creature deck. Those are the decks you want to play against all night long. Burn, Goblins, 8-Whack, Merfolk, heck, even Infect with all the cheap removal we got here. And this has some other interesting little nuances in the modern format. Also, attacking with a flipped Lone Rider and then playing another Lone Rider means that Lone Rider will flip right away the same turn as well. So once you get one Lone Rider flipped, it's easy to flip more. And it just gets really silly if you have more than one out in play. So yeah, tons of synergy with what's going on already in this deck. And it's just kind of amusing sometimes. Like against a Tron deck, when they have an Ugin out, Ugin can't deal with a flipped Lone Rider because it's got 4 toughness and it's colorless. And that situation has come up more than once in my matches against Tron. So yeah, and once you start swinging with Lone Riders or flipped Lone Riders, the life you gain will just get completely out of control. You'll put any aggro deck or burn deck just completely out of range of being able to kill you. And so that it just gets silly. Weaknesses for this deck, or at least this version, is it's a bit weaker to control decks. Combo decks, you can pressure them pretty quickly with the flipped Lone Rider. But control decks, they're going to have better counter spells than you. We've got the 2 Izzet Charms, the 3 Mana Leaks, and the 3 Ojutai's Command. And so they'll have better card draw, better card advantage engines, and they've got more than enough removal to repeatedly take care of your threats here, since we're still not super threat dense. So yeah, other control matchups weren't the greatest with this deck, but still tons of fun to play. I also made some changes to the mana base. I took out the man lands for this build since I wanted to focus more on Lone Rider, and also I was lowering the curve a bit more. So I wanted lands that could come into play untapped, no questions asked in the early turns. So I replaced the man lands with 3 Seachrome Coasts and 1 Inspiring Vantage. There'd probably be more of the Vantage and Spirebluff Canal over the Seachrome Coast if I had them. I just played the fast lands I had, and right now I only have 1 Canal and 1 Vantage. So there's that. Sideboard also changed a bit. We moved the Anger of the Gods to the sideboard because they're still kind of nice to have. And took out the Pithing Needle. That was a really tough thing to cut. I'd still like to get that back in here somehow. But I also put in 2 Counterflux. We removed the Pithing Needle, the Young Pyromancers, because we don't need Pyromancers anymore when we've got 4 Lone Riders floating around in the main deck. We have plenty of 2-mana aggressive-ish creatures that can win us the game. So I went with the Counterflux, and I also took out the Gideon kind of for the same reasons, because Lone Riders can put enough pressure on people. And Counterflux is really nice. Which, that also reminds me, I still want to do more of like a traditional control type of deck with Jeskai colors and get the Counterfluxes in the main deck and just play a lot more of like a draw-go style. Now that's also on my to-do list. Also on my to-do list is like a blue-green Tron deck that I've been actively trying to make deck lists for, but I just can't get a combination of cards that feels good to me for having blue and green, and also representing the blue and green enough in the Tron deck. So yeah, that's another one of the things I've been working on. But this deck is lots of fun, and so it's also why I call it Nahiri Rides Alone. I mean, the title catches the 2 main card names, even though the implications of the title aren't really accurate to how the deck actually performs. So yeah, this has been Jeskai Nahiri with Soulfire Grandmaster, and another version with Lone Rider. So once again, fun deck. If your meta's filled with tons of aggro creature-based decks and burn, definitely run this. This will scare any burn player. So, yeah, I think that's all I got for you. I went over the mana base, went over the sideboard changes. So, we'll call it a night here. Next, I'll be working on the upgrade to that Sultai Glissa's Gifts deck. Definitely revisiting that now with the Fatal Pushes out, and oh my, that deck is it's doing very well. Still got to work on some issues I'm having with it regarding combo decks and such, but I'll work on getting that sort of stuff hammered out, work on getting it tweaked. Not sure when you can expect to see another video on that, but that'll be the next topic we cover or revisit. So thank you for joining me. This has been Late Night Mega. Good night, everyone.